Today, we'll learn about an organisation set up in the aftermath of tragedy, where, in unprecedented times, the Charities Commission drove the creation of the National Emergencies Trust. Launching just 4 months into the pandemic in 2020, with royal patronage from Prince William and raising £100 million for COVID relief, it is an organisation driven by data to ensure equity in the distribution of funds to those who need it most. I'm Catherine Levin, editor of Emergency Services Times, and in this episode, we'll hear from Mhairi Sharp, CEO of the National Emergencies Trust. Emerging threats and resilience is one of the themes for this year's Emergency Services show, so I was keen to talk to Mhairi about the Trust's work and how it connects with the blue lights. When disaster strikes, the emergency services respond, but in parallel, the National Emergencies Trust is also working away to determine whether to launch a fundraising appeal. In a matter of 4 hours, Mhairi, her team and the board are working through questions like, what is the propensity to give here? And is it the right thing to do? We talk about influence and the levers of power to make changes that impact the survivors' experience, because they are at the heart of the response. And in this interview, you'll hear about how the Trust has made a huge difference to many, many lives. To start this conversation, I asked Mhairi to tell us more about the origins of the National Emergencies Trust.
The National Emergencies Trust was born out of several incidents that occurred in 2017. So Manchester Arena, Grenfell, and also the terror attacks in London. And it was actually the Charities Commission that stepped in at the end of 2017 and said, charities are fantastic individually, but we need to bring them together. We need one trusted place to give and receive funds during times of national emergency. So that's where the idea came from. They brought together leaders from across the sector and from across emergency response to come up with the idea for it. And then I interviewed for the role to build the trust in 2019. So what our job really is, because it started in one place and it has evolved as these things do. It's broken down into three areas. First of all, our response to national emergencies. During a national emergency, we'll aim to launch an appeal very quickly, within 4 hours, ideally, for a quick onset emergency, raise significant funds and distribute them equitably. Now, 10% of our focus there is really on the fundraising. The remainder is on the equitable distribution, making sure nobody's left behind, that we can support all needs, and that we're there not just for the bereaved and the seriously injured, but also for their families and the widespread needs that come with them. Now, what we also do is we respond to local emergencies, probably 5 to 10 local emergencies a year. And we work very closely with the police force on this, often called out by family liaison officers, for example. Think Southport, the Liverpool parade crash, the major bus crash in Minehead last summer. And our job there is really to convene, to advise and to problem solve, to make sure that incidents that happen or issues that arise at a national level don't occur at a local level. And the third thing we do is all about impact. It's about making sure that future survivors are better served, whether that's changing legislation, creating new policy, building new tools, being innovative, creating partnerships, but ultimately making sure that when the next thing happens, the systems that are set up to support survivors are better prepared.
Great. Thank you for tripping us through that. So 3 very clear areas there. You started by talking about the setup with the Charities Commission taking the initiative there. Is it unusual for an organisation like that to do something which leads to the organisation like yours being set up? I've never come across that. Was it unusual?
As far as I'm aware of, it's unheard of. Usually the Charities Commission might step in to close a charity down, but very rarely, or if not never, to set one up. But there was that clear need.
And you also have some patronage as well. So the launch was with the Prince of Wales. Is he still involved in the Trust?
He is. The Prince of Wales has been fantastic for the Trust. He's our royal patron. He's officially on board. When we launched, he was actually just there to launch us. But I think he got to know us and wanted to be part of it. And I mean, when we launched for the pandemic, we were 4 months old in 2020. And without the Prince there at the front of our appeal, I question whether we would have raised £100 million, whether we would have supported 13 million people. We were also able to report back to Kensington Palace to say, look, every time the Prince puts a VT out on the BBC, for example, we're able to see spikes in funds to X amount. We might see £500,000 come in over a lunch period when his face has been all over the news.
And does that happen in other charities when he's involved? That impact that he has of simply being behind something that people will think differently because they've seen a royal talking about it?
I mean, the royal family are incredible for charities, that's for sure. But I think Emergencies are very unique. You're able to see that spike, and being a new charity, we're able to have that new data and show the impact without comparison.
And you mentioned £100 million there. I noticed in your accounts for 2001, you had £89 million in that. And how do you distribute that amount of money in an equitable way? What is the process for doing that?
It's a huge process, actually. So we rely on data scientists, several sets or tens of sets of data, and also emerging policies. So if we look at the £100 million distributed throughout the COVID response, we did that through 47 local hubs. So 3 in each of the devolved nations and 4 across the counties in England. And these are UK community foundations who really understand the need on the ground. They understand their local communities. But of course, the demographic in Surrey is very different to the demographic in Northumberland, for example. So what we do is we look at indices of deprivation, we look at the elderly population, and we'll create a formula so that we're not slicing the pie or the £5 million that we might be distributing that week equally by population. We're taking into account who lives there. And then we empower the local hubs to make that distribution in line with the needs locally.
And who are in these local hubs? Are these politicians? Are they community leaders? Where are they drawn from?
So the local hubs are the community foundations. They exist year round. Many of them have been there for decades, and that their day job is grant making. So they understand how to distribute funds and they understand the charities on the ground. When we look at the devolved nations, we bring together, so Scotland, for example, we had the Scottish Emergency Funding Advisory Board to really flex our needs to the needs in a different nation. So we had politicians, we had corporate leaders, we had civil servants, and we had the charity sector there as well, alongside lived experience, which is really important to us, making sure that distribution is informed by those who have needed that support previously.
So that was very much around COVID and equity in order to determine who got what based on what needs through those community groups. That's quite clear in terms of the grant making experience, the local understanding of need. In terms of understanding that the money got to the right place and had the impact you wanted to have, how do you track impact?
So we have data brought back to us through every grant that we make. So in COVID, there were 15,000 charity grants, which ultimately supported 13 million people. So that data is coming back to us and it's informing our forward decisions. It's also informing government. We take that data because we've got a real understanding of what's the need on the ground. Our data is a reflection of need. So feeding that into policymakers at central government level as well. But post-emergency, we'll always have an evaluation. Nottingham Trent University carried out a year-long evaluation of our COVID response because it was such a detailed response. And it brought up every need from domestic violence, which was, of course, a hidden need, to education needs, food, shelter, those more basic needs that were really highlighted in the news at the time.
And these are, I wonder, I was thinking about acute versus chronic when I was doing some research about you in terms of, so COVID was a acute need, but lasted quite a long time, so almost chronic, but not quite. And then you were talking about these local emergencies like Southcourt, the Liverpool, what happened in Water Street with the car going through the crowd and the Liverpool football fans. Those are relatively short events. So how do you, with your funding, decide how much to put in with this formula around what's long, what's short, what qualifies, what doesn't qualify? Could you help us sort of understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people think we're sat on money the whole time. The bank is at zero currently. So we will only raise funds in relation to any given appeal. So we have a very strict activation criteria, and there's 4 points, and we need to answer 4 questions based on intelligence that we gather. Now, bearing in mind that for a quick onset emergency, we'll need to launch within 4 hours. And by quick onset, I mean a terror attack or a large scale fire. For a pandemic or a flood, a slow rise emergency will go as quickly as is sensible. So we hear about the emergency through our intelligence contacts and, if we're honest, through Twitter and through breaking news, because it will come through quite quickly, naturally. And we have a team that is focused entirely on gathering that information. So they'll work to answer 4 questions. Is there propensity to give? So to answer that question, we will have data coming to us from Just Giving and GoFundMe and crowdfund. The giving platforms will give us data every 2 hours to show us how many people have set up a giving page, how much have they given to that page. We'll also have our major appeal partners, so household name corporates that are set up with us already. They'll start knocking on our door saying, we've seen it, are you going for it? And that's always a good indicator to us as well. And we also look at historic data, so emergencies of a similar type that have happened in the last 50 years. What was raised for them? Did it generate that propensity to give with the public? The second question we're asking ourselves is there need? There's always need if there's a small flat fire, but is that need unmet? Is that need so significant that police officers are crossing county lines, for example? And then we're looking at national significance. Is it trending on Twitter? Is it front page news? Is it retaining its front page news position? Because flash floods often don't even make it to the front page, but they are significant emergencies. And then finally, is it the right thing to do? So if you're looking at Grenfell, in those first 4 hours, you had very little of that intelligence, but you could see from the news that what was evolving and how rapidly it was evolving. So that intelligence team is bringing that information to me, and I'm making a recommendation to the board on let's go now or let's wait for this intelligence. The other part of the team is getting ready to press the button on the website to make sure that our accounts are ready to go, that the BBC, ITV, the Prince of Wales are ready to get that message out there and go big and go quickly as soon as we've made that decision.
And that's all happening in that 4-hour window?
Yes, most of it's templated, most of it is levers ready to pull, but it's all hands on deck for that rapid period and for the first 48 hours of the appeal, when you'll probably see 80% of the funds roll in.
Okay, so you talk about a team. So I know you're the chief executive, but do you have a full-time member team waiting? Do you pull them in when you need to? How does that work?
The team are incredibly busy. So we have a small permanent team who work on the impact projects when we're not in response mode or local emergency response mode. But we also have a surge capacity team. So during COVID, for example, we surged from, at the time, it was, I think, 1.6 staff members. I was the one, and there were two other part-timers, but up to 156 people. And many of those were furloughed staff members. So we have arrangements with our corporate partners who will offer us a data scientist pro bono, or the head of risk for the Bank of England, for example, who joined us during COVID. We also have surge agencies that will come on board and support us as well.
That's quite a range of people, isn't it, that you can call on? I mean, to have that influence, to be able to get people to stop doing what they're doing and help you is quite phenomenal. And I wonder how much of that is drawn from your board. So you have John Barradell as your chair of the board, and the network of people that he and your board members have. How important is it to have that kind of board leadership, that the significance of the names and where they've come from to help drive that influence you've just described?
It's really important. And yes, for the surge capacity, but actually more so for the donations. If you're the chief exec of HSBC and you're looking to give £1 million to a charity that didn't exist 4 months ago, you want to ask some pretty important questions. Great to see we've got the Prince of Wales. That's a huge tick in the box. Who else is there to make sure that I'm giving funds to the right place? And as soon as you start to look at the board members, John and others, that gives a huge amount of credibility.
Yes, I can see that. So you mentioned just now about Grenfell, and it made me think about the immediate reaction to that, which is that people wanted to help, that people wanted to bring things and set up places where firefighters could have water, where people could have clothes. And my recollection of it 8 years on is that there was a lot of things there, but not all of it got in the right places. So in terms of what you're doing with the trust, do you think it replaces that now, that you won't see those local reactions to crisis, so that it can be better, so the needs can be better met? Is that really where you are now 8 years on?
I'd say no. And the reason for that is the local population wherever the emergency, are always the first responders, whether it's a Grenfell situation or a flood. The local population, they don't need to be trained. They have that instinctive human response, and they are just incredible on the ground, and we never want to stop that. You almost don't even want to put structure around it. You just need to know that it's happening, and you need to let those who sit around local resilience forum tables know it's happening, and let's get messages out to them so that they can direct their support.
Yeah, that local community effort, you're right, that people will instinctively look after where they live, and it makes sense. Now, in terms of people living in areas where they're starting to see repeated events, so thinking about flooding, thinking about extreme heat, cold, when you're thinking about your process there that you went through very carefully, if someone's having these repeat events, repeat floods, repeat issues to do with weather, do you still stand up? Do you deal with those kind of, I suppose they're chronic, aren't they? They just keep happening. Where do you fit with those sort of, what you use the phrase, so slow rise just now? Do they qualify for that?
So it always comes back to the criteria. And one of the sticking points is often propensity to give. So we're not here to generate a propensity to give. That costs a significant amount of money. When the British public care, they will give money to it. So often flooding at the minute is a local level emergency. So we support quietly in the background. We'll support with the fundraising, the distribution, and making sure that these problems that always arise are resolved quickly. If the propensity to give is there, we will launch for it, but it will need to be a significant flood to hit our national appeal level.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the Emergency Services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
So let's move on to talk about the people who have been affected by disaster. I was looking through the survivor stories on your website, and they're incredibly powerful, the videos that you've put on there. They talk about dignity, and one of the survivors of the Westminster Bridge attack said that access to funding took away the financial worry and gave me back my independence and self-esteem. How are you able to connect those affected with the funding that they need to recover, and how do you know it's enough? So there's an immediate response, but some of these will have impacts that last for years. So how can you help them when you're in this kind of short-term space, but what happens in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways. First of all, we have a survivors advisory forum, and this is made up of survivors going all the way back to Aberfan. Jeff was the last boy to be pulled out of Aberfan alive. So we have an incredible amount of first-hand knowledge, that lived experience on the ground. And these are people that feed into us to make sure that our policies will support survivors, but also that when we're in that response mode, that we're getting it right. We also work very closely with family liaison officers, and we attend a lot of family liaison officer training courses so that they're aware of who we are. So whenever we're in response mode, we work hand in hand. And the idea there is that if you are bereaved or seriously injured, you're not retelling your story. You never need to speak to the National Emergencies Trust or one of our distribution partners. You only speak to your family liaison officer. And that's a great thing. You're not retelling your story. You're not thinking about the funding or the support. Everything is done for you whilst you're sat in your living room.
The survivors group that you mentioned just now, do they come together collectively to share experience and to think about how to improve it for those that may be survivors in the future? Is that the intention, to learn from them so that others may have a better experience in terms of coming out of disaster?
Exactly that. So it was actually born out of our 2019 consultation, where we travelled across the 4 nations, meeting with responders and survivors of emergencies, going back 50 plus years, and asking them the big questions. What went well? What didn't go well? What would you change in the future? And frustratingly, but not surprisingly, the same issues came up at Aberfan, at Hillsborough, at Grenfell, and so on. So we created a list, 40 issues. We've managed to resolve 25 of those issues by creating partnerships policies and changing legislation. The remaining 15 of those issues you can't resolve. They're things like media intrusion. You can only chip away at them. You can work with the media. You can give best practice and guidance and so on. So off the back of that, we thought, this is incredible knowledge we're getting. We seem to be going around in circles towards the end, getting the same information time and time again. But we knew that new information would come to light as more emergencies occur. So we brought together that Survivors Advisory Forum. So their role is twofold. When we're not in emergency response mode, their job is to look at our impact work. At the minute, we're doing a lot of impact work on mental health, generative AI, societal resilience, and they will join strategic steering groups alongside ministers and senior corporate representatives and our board members as well, to make sure that whatever we build, whatever our strategy is, it works for future survivors. It pins us down to our end user, our customer, if you like. In an emergency, their job is to look at how we're responding, look at the needs emerging on the ground, and to say, look, this group is being left behind. I think they're being forgotten. This group is being spoken to in a way that might not work for them in their state of mind and how they're feeling right now. We need to change our approach. So they have a very, very important role in terms of response, but also that preparation work and making sure that future survivors are better served.
It's incredible, isn't it, that people who have been through such trauma are willing then to use that to help others. I think there's something incredibly powerful about that and very selfless. And I'm amazed you talk about somebody from Aberfan, which I think is 60 years ago.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so amazing that it can have such a span. I want to pick up on a couple of things that you've said there. So one is the family liaison officer. Is that a role within every police force to have those, or does it sit in the local authority?
That sits within the police force.
Right, okay. So that's a connection. You're connected with the system that already exists.
Yes, and we actually hired a fantastic family liaison lead as well, who is well connected across the 4 nations.
Right, so they understand the system. Because a lot of this is about understanding the system, isn't it? And I wonder, when you were talking about 40 things you wanted to change as a result of doing this survey in 2019, and 25 of them have been done, I wonder how much of that is around policy and politicians. So the levers of change often sit with politicians and in Parliament. And to what extent have you had to influence legislation for primary, secondary, guidance and things? How much of that have you been able to do as a result of all the work so far?
Quite a lot, actually. So in terms of policy and the Civil Contingencies Act, we've become the lead organisation for the voluntary sector, pulling together that voice of the sector and feeding it back into any Civil Contingencies Act reviews, which enable us to influence the way that the country prepares for the next emergency. We also work across the MOD and their war games and bringing that human voice to the war games. We work centrally with the Cabinet Office on a number of different projects. But also in terms of legislation change, we work with the Ministry of Justice and DWP. We managed to change 2 pieces of legislation with regards to capital disregards. So if you receive a cash gift from a charity because you are a mother who's been bereaved, that would stop your access to child benefits if you had another child. So we've seen this occur a number of times. So we created new legislation whereby if you receive a gift, you can still access your existing benefits. But the same for the Ministry of Justice with regards to legal aid as well. Cash gifts won't negate your access to legal aid.
And are you doing that because your board is well connected? How do you get into the sort of corridors of power? Is it through the sort of all-party parliamentary groups? What is the kind of system that you're tapping into there to enable that change?
So when we were first born, we were given a £100,000 grant through DCMS. And it was, here's some seed funding and then go and find some funding to keep yourself going. And most of that funding now comes from the corporate sector. But in line with the funding, you have to go in once a month and report back on what you're doing. And that enabled us to open a lot of doors and build relationships rapidly to the point that by the time COVID struck, when we were 4 months old, we received a £20 million grant from the Treasury. Rishi Sunak called us up and signed that one off. And the reason for that was because they had seen the operating model. They understood what we were doing. They understood how cash was getting out on the ground and supporting communities. And they were able to back us and be confident and also proud of what we were doing.
And that is a huge amount of trust, isn't it? Trust based on the systems that you've described. Because as we've seen through recent times around fraud and post-COVID and just money going where it shouldn't be and people getting where they shouldn't. So I think it's interesting that this system and the trust and the levers of power, plus all the people involved, have created this incredible ability to help people in their darkest hour and also bring them out the other side of the survivors. That's very impressive. Can I just ask you about the Civil Contingencies Act? We saw last year there was a consultation on whether the voluntary sector should be included as a Cat 1, Cat 2 responder. What's your view on that? Do you think the voluntary sector should be recognised in that? Because my understanding at the moment is that hasn't been accepted and won't change. But I just wonder what your view was.
Yes, we've sat around that table for a while. It's an important piece that's being pushed forward. I understand the pushback from the Cat 1 side. I do think it needs to be simplified. For Cat 1s to work in partnership across every charity would be extremely difficult. But to work with some of the major resilience charities, of which there's probably around 5, who then support those other charities. So for example, we have a national charities program. Our national charity partners support every need and every demographic across the 4 nations. So by working through us as a Cat 1 responder, you can actually access support through others like Age UK or British Red Cross, Victim Support and others. So you don't necessarily need to work with every charity. There could be a simplified middle ground. And I think most of those who are close to it understand that. It's just bringing that narrative and that understanding along, because Cat 1 responders don't have a huge amount of spare time to understand new systems.
So in terms of thinking about the local resilience environments and resilience forums, would they all be very aware of you, your work, your capability to help them when the worst happens?
Yes, I think so. I mean, local resilience forums we work very closely with, and also the UK Resilience Forum as well.
So that's, when you say UK, since you talk about out of the Cabinet Office? Yes.
So Penny Mordaunt set it up originally when we first joined. That was handed over to Oliver Dowden. It's closed down temporarily, but I believe the government of the day will be opening it up again shortly.
Right. Okay. Because we've seen quite a lot of change at that Cabinet Office level when Pat McFadden was there in terms of the National Resilience Register and National Resilience Framework. And then with him going, I'm not sure what the focus is. It seemed like resilience was having a bit of a renaissance, and I'm not sure at the moment. I don't see much coming out at the moment, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space. So thinking about resilience, we will be doing something with that at the Emergency Services Show this year. One of our themes is about emerging threats and resilience, and just thinking about leadership. We've got John Barradell, we talked about him a little bit earlier. And when I interviewed him a few years ago when he was in the City of London Corporation, he talked about the need for leaders to have resilience. It's something they talk about every day, that the person in charge of resilience should be talking to the chief exec. It was important. And I just wonder, when you're talking to organisations, do you find that resilience piece that is broadly set, are leaders really thinking about resilience and how they can cope with it when things go wrong, so that when you come in, you can do your work? Is it there? Is it part of the leadership mindset?
I'd say increasingly so. I think COVID was a really good catalyst because it impacted everyone. For example, yesterday we spent the day with the Association of British Insurers and 84 leaders from across AXA, Admiral, Aviva, all of your major insurers. And it was top of mind for them. And we spent 4.5 hours discussing it. So yes, I think it is increasingly on the agenda. And you can see it. We're constantly applying for grants to support our core cost funding, and societal resilience and community resilience is now featuring in the grant making world, which it didn't previously.
Yes, I see that phrase, whole of society resilience. Toby Harris in the National Preparedness Commission talks a lot about whole of society resilience. You see him probably on LinkedIn talking about, this is what I said in the House of Lords, very keen to get that phrase out there. Do you think that's an easy phrase to say, but hard to achieve?
I think it's achievable. We have a plan in place to be a big part of it, which we launched on Tuesday this week, around a tool that is an enabler for communities to enable societal resilience for absolutely everyone across every community in response to any type of emergency. So I think the government currently turning from that big strategic talking to let's operationalize this and move forward and create impact on the ground. So I'm hopeful, and I think people are increasingly pulling in the right direction together. I think the whole of society has been lots of silos talking to each other occasionally. I'm seeing much more conversation at the minute and much more willingness to break down those barriers and recognize each other's strengths as well.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. So in terms of keeping you up in the public consciousness to know what you're doing, and particularly within our world with the emergency services, to know that A, you exist, B, what your capabilities are and how it operates in kind of peacetime and in wartime, if I can use that phraseology. I wonder, you recently said that you'd got your first celebrity ambassador, Ross Kemp, who we know from EastEnders, and in fact was at the show a couple of years ago, the Emergency Services show, talking about his career and talking about his sort of world of security and policing and things that he's been involved with. Can you tell me why you decided to have Ross as your celebrity ambassador, and what will be the impact of having someone like that involved?
Yeah, absolutely. It was entirely opportunistic. We were at an event together and I saw him and Gary Lineker at separate sides of the room, and I thought, which one shall I go for? And Ross was the obvious option. It was a restricted event, so we couldn't use mobile phones. We had no pen and paper. So he said he would do it if I could remember his phone number. So an hour later, I jumped into my taxi, called him up, and he said, all right, I'll do it. And he's been fantastic. He's already supported us. He's supported our Christmas public fundraising campaign and helped us to raise £20,000 within a week, which was fantastic. He was a good sport. He put a Christmas jumper on for us and did a number of videos. So he's going to be fantastic. I mean, the reason I wanted to bring him on as soon as I saw him, I thought he'd be great for the trust, is he is one of the celebrity faces of emergencies and response. Of course, he's made a career out of it. And he also talks to a demographic that Westminster don't necessarily talk to. If people understand him, they like him. It doesn't matter which government of the day he's in. Ross is always there. And he's an incredibly down-to-earth celebrity as well.
And so how long will he be with you for the foreseeable future?
Forever, I imagine. Yeah.
Forever. Amazing.
Into someone, we tend to keep hold of them.
Fantastic. And you talked about Prince William giving you a spike every time he kind of appears and talks about the campaign. So that spike obviously being repeated there with Ross Kemp as well, which is great to see. So looking ahead then to the next few years, what's the plans for the Trust?
So emergency response is number one. Big national emergencies, we always need to be there. We need to be able to flex up within that 4-hour period. In terms of local emergencies, these are increasing, not just because of the risk landscape, but also because of the awareness of us. However, what we are seeing is those who we've responded to and with are now working hand in hand with the next response. So we're able to connect people up in a peer-to-peer support system to enable us to have the capacity to continue to respond at that local level. But in terms of the impact work, we've got some huge projects that will take us through the next 3+ years. We have a PhD student working with us on a mental health tool, which enables us to increase the capacity to respond to the mental health needs following a large-scale emergency. The UK doesn't have the capacity to respond at the minute. We always see people sitting on GP waiting lists for 6 to 12 months looking for that support. We have a generative AI project, which is bringing together vulnerability data, national risk data, charity sector resource. And this enables the public to find support. It enables us and government to exercise appropriately, flexing to the needs of those on the ground, but also looking at the risks in the local area. And most importantly, it enables us to distribute funds equitably as soon as the emergency occurs, bearing in mind that during COVID, it took us so much time to get that information. And then the big project for us that we kick-started on Tuesday is societal resilience. It's building this tool that enables the public to respond to needs, whether it's an attack on the home front, a pandemic, a flood, a terror attack. It doesn't really matter. It just puts the knowledge into the hands of the general public so that they're able to support their communities.
So you've got that marrying up of equitable and enabling there. I'm interested in this generative AI. Of course, every interview I do, we seem to talk about AI at some capacity or other. So I'm delighted to hear it here. I'm very interested that you're using vulnerability data, because emergency services, when they're looking to help people in their local area, will have their own pot of data, but actually sharing it with people in their partner organisations, the local authority, the charities, and so forth, data sharing just becomes this massive blocker to achieving a sort of wide view of vulnerability in the area. So how have you managed to correct that? And how will your Gen AI project help you do that? And will you be sharing that with the blue lights?
In response to the last part, yes, absolutely. We'll be sharing it with everyone. The way we've managed to do it is we're working in partnership with Siemens, who have backed this, not just financially, but with an amazing amount of expertise and people hours, but also with central government to bring together data sources and expertise so that we can overlay them. But a number of our corporate partners have also offered us data as well. So on top of the base level data, such as ONS data and vulnerability data, we also have a number of other very detailed data sources that we'll use as and when we need to.
So does that mean you're not using personal data then? So it's types of people rather than names of people. Is that how you're managing to do it?
Yes.
Okay. So you're doing it based on addresses and places rather than people individually. So that's great that you're managing to get the commercial sector to bring all that expertise in to help you to drive change, and that ultimately the emergency services will benefit from that because then you'll be able to give them data, which is perhaps something they're not able to achieve locally with those data sharing barriers I just mentioned. On the point about sharing information, so you mentioned to me earlier about Blue Light Card Foundation and the partnership you have with them. Now, just to clarify, is it the foundation, the charity, or Blue Light Card itself? And what is your work you're doing with them?
It's the foundation. So when we set the charity up and we were speaking to those first responders on the ground, we heard the common story of the burnt out police officer, the crime scene investigator, and those, a number of officers that don't work in uniform, those, or the receptionist at the hospital who's seen the trauma, who's been burnt out by the trauma, but hasn't been able to access support because they don't sit within those structures. And emergencies don't traditionally raise funds for first responders. It seemed to be, an issue in the line of duty. So we created the partnership with the Blue Light Foundation so that following an incident like Manchester Arena, we're able to distribute funds to the foundation, and the foundation is able to work with a number of different charities who support those in uniform, but also the other responders, anyone who's been impacted in the line of duty.
So that would be organisations like the Firefighters Charity and Police Care.
Absolutely.
Like that. And
a real wide range, beyond those regular ones that everyone's heard of.
Okay. And is that relatively recent, that partnership?
It was the end of last year that we signed that one off. It's been a long time in the making, and the Blue Lights Foundation is relatively new. So they've done a fantastic job of pulling everyone together and convening a great panel who can support every type of service person.
Right, excellent. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's interesting to me. So we've been through an awful lot there. We're going to come to the end of our time speaking today. Thank you so much for sharing what you're doing there. It's incredible. Did you feel like the emergency services know you as an organisation?
Increasingly, but there's a long way to go. We have Jules Welby, who many of your listeners will know. She's did 32 years in the Metropolitan Police. She's our development director, and she is travelling constantly, talking at different police conferences and training opportunities. But there's a long way to go.
Excellent. Well, hopefully this conversation will help people understand. So I've learned a vast amount talking to you, and that it will help with that widening awareness and just doing some fantastic work. So thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you, Catherine.
I love that story about Ross Kemp wearing a Christmas jumper, helping to raise funds. It's clear from this conversation that the approach of the Trust, with its focus on survivors, both those who've been affected and those who may be in the future, is people-centred and learning from the past. I'm taken by the conversation we have about systems and interactions between organisations. The Trust has influenced legislation to improve the lives of people affected by disaster. This is powerful stuff. It's in a position now to influence the way the country prepares. We will see changes to legislation to formalise Cat 1 responders working in partnership with a small group of resilience charities, as Barry suggests. It seems sensible, but it isn't agreed just yet. It's work in progress. Barry is hopeful, seeing people working together and talking more to break down barriers. And she's right to be optimistic, because this is what's needed to achieve the goal of whole of society resilience. This conversation has inspired me, and I'm looking forward to developing the emerging threats and resilience theme at the Emergency Services Show in September. That's it from me for now. Episodes of this series drop every Tuesday. All our podcast episodes are sponsored by MSA Safety, and we're so grateful to them for their support. Be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to For Every Response, a podcast for Emergency Services Times.